Hello, dreamers. I'm the Success Dreamer. These stories are here to inspire you while you fall asleep. If they bring you peace and motivation, please like the video and subscribe. Now, breathe deeply, relax, and enjoy the story. Tonight, as the rain falls softly outside your window, let me tell you a story. This is not just any story. It is a story of success. A story of a man who came from the Brooklyn projects and built a global coffee empire that changed how the world connects. This is the journey of Howard Schultz, the visionary behind Starbucks. In a small apartment in the Bayview housing projects of Brooklyn, New York, a boy was born into a world that made survival the only priority. His name was Howard Schultz. His family had very little. The walls of their home were thin, the heat unreliable, and their worries endless. His father, Fred, worked odd jobs as a truck driver, cab driver, and factory worker, each one harder and more thankless than the last. Howard watched his father come home each night exhausted, bitter, and often defeated. One winter, Fred slipped on a patch of ice while delivering cloth diapers. He was badly injured. No insurance. No workers' compensation. Just silence. Pain. A family left scrambling with nothing. Howard never forgot that moment. The helplessness in his father's eyes. The way his family was left behind by a system that never cared. But deep within that small apartment, a dream was quietly forming. Howard didn't know how or when, but he felt it, a determination to build something better. He knew he didn't want a life like his father's. He wanted dignity. He wanted freedom. And he wanted to create something where people would be treated like human beings, not disposable labor. As a child, he would climb to the rooftop and stare at the horizon, dreaming of a world beyond Brooklyn. A world where his family didn't have to worry about broken hips or unpaid bills. He didn't have the words yet, but he had the fire. In school, he didn't shine. They teased him for wearing the same clothes every day. But sports became his escape, especially football. He wasn't the fastest, but he played with heart. And that heart earned him something no one expected, a football scholarship to college. It was the first crack in the wall, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, he could make it out. Howard Schultz's story doesn't begin with coffee. It begins with pain, with poverty, with a boy watching his family suffer and vowing, deep inside, that someday he'd build a different life. Not just for himself, but for people like his father. And now, as you drift deeper into rest, let that truth settle in your heart. Even in the smallest places, dreams can be born. Even from broken beginnings, greatness can grow. Howard had never left New York. He had never stepped inside a college lecture hall, never imagined himself living in a place where people wore warm jackets and smiled with ease. But that all changed when he set foot on the campus of Northern Michigan University. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't polished. But it was different. And for him, different meant hope. He arrived on a football scholarship. Not because he was a star athlete, but because he had played with heart. That heart had pushed him past other boys who were stronger and faster. For the first time, Howard wasn't surrounded by the noise of the projects. He was in a quiet place, unfamiliar and cold, with time to think, time to observe, and time to breathe. But being there didn't mean things got easier. His scholarship barely covered his tuition. He couldn't afford textbooks or meals. He sold his blood plasma to pay for groceries. He worked as a bartender, a dishwasher, a night porter, anything that kept him going one more day. While others went to parties, Howard went to work. While they rested, he hustled. Then, something happened. A moment that wouldn't seem significant to others, but for him, it changed everything. One weekend, he visited a friend's home. The house was modest but warm. The furniture was soft. The room smelled like coffee and wood polish. There were family photos on the wall, books neatly stacked, and a quiet sense of comfort in the air. It was the first time Howard had seen that kind of life up close. A life not defined by struggle, but by peace. It wasn't about money. It was about stability. And that quiet moment lit something inside him. He realized he didn't just want to escape poverty. He wanted to create that feeling of safety, of warmth, of belonging, not just for himself, but for people like his parents. People who had worked hard their whole lives and never had that kind of peace. That visit stayed with him. It followed him through long nights and early mornings. It gave him a new kind of dream, not to become rich, but to build something that made people feel seen, welcome, and human. He didn't know what form it would take. Not yet. But that glimpse of possibility had given him direction. It was no longer about surviving. It was about creating something that could help others feel at home, even in the middle of their hardest days. Howard returned to campus more focused than ever. His surroundings didn't change. His bank account didn't suddenly fill up, but his mindset shifted. He began to understand that some moments aren't just passing experiences. They are glimpses of the future, gently revealing what you're meant to build. And as he looked out at the snow-covered streets of Michigan, one thought kept echoing in his mind. There has to be more than this. And someday I'm going to find it. Howard's scholarship didn't last. He had made it to Northern Michigan University on the strength of his heart, but the odds were never in his favor. He wasn't fast enough, not quite strong enough to keep his spot on the football team. One quiet afternoon, the coaches called him in and delivered the news. He was cut. The scholarship was gone. It felt like the door that had barely opened was now closing again. But Howard didn't quit. He didn't pack his bags or go home in defeat. He stayed, because even without a scholarship, even without much money, something inside him refused to let go of the shot at a different life. To survive, he worked any job he could find. He cleaned dorm bathrooms before sunrise, worked the front desk at the university center, and bartended late into the night. He shoveled snow in the brutal Michigan winters, carried boxes for odd jobs, even sold his own blood plasma to make ends meet. There were nights he went to bed hungry, days when he studied through exhaustion, and weekends that passed in a blur of double shifts. He was always tired, always behind on bills, but never behind on hope. Most students around him had no idea what that kind of struggle looked like, but Howard didn't envy them. He watched quietly and learned. He studied not just books, but people. He saw how the world made room for the privileged and how it overlooked those who worked the hardest. And he remembered his father. Always his father. Ray Schultz had worked dozens of jobs, but never found one that offered stability, benefits, or even respect. One injury, and his family had collapsed financially. That memory haunted Howard, but it also became his reason. He began to wonder, what if companies could be different? What if a business could care? Could a job offer dignity? These weren't business goals. They were personal vows. By the time Howard finally graduated, there were no grand celebrations, no applause or fanfare. Just a young man with tired eyes, calloused hands, and a quiet fire inside. He had fought for this diploma not just for a piece of paper, but for proof. Proof that a poor kid from the projects could break through. He didn't know where the road would lead, but he knew this. He wasn't just going to chase success. He was going to redefine it. And this was only the beginning. After graduation, Howard Schultz didn't walk into success. He walked into a tiny office, wearing a cheap suit and holding onto a dream most people couldn't see. He moved to New York City, a place that was loud, fast, and brutally competitive. Rent was high, jobs were scarce. But Howard believed that if he could just get his foot in the right door, he could climb. His first job? A sales rep for Xerox. He sold office equipment, copiers, typewriters, printers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Xerox had one of the best sales training programs in the country. Howard listened, absorbed, and practiced. Every rejection on the phone sharpened his instincts. Every slammed door made his skin thicker. And slowly he rose. But sales weren't enough. Howard wanted meaning, purpose. He didn't just want to sell products. He wanted to connect with people, build something that mattered. That's when he landed a job at Hammerplast, a Swedish company that sold kitchen equipment, including coffee machines. At just 26, he became their U.S. Director of Sales. It was a huge leap. One day, he noticed something strange in the sales reports. A small company in Seattle kept ordering more coffee filters than anyone else. It didn't make sense. They weren't a large chain. They were just a handful of stores. Howard was curious. Who were they? So, in 1981, he booked a flight and visited this tiny company, Starbucks Coffee Company. The moment he walked into their Pike Place store, something clicked. The smell of roasted beans filled the air. The atmosphere felt warm, almost sacred. The employees weren't just clerks. They were passionate about coffee. This wasn't a store. It was an experience. One that felt completely different from anything he had seen. Howard felt something stir in him. It wasn't just about coffee. It was about community, connection. A ritual that could bring people together. He left Seattle feeling inspired and unsettled. Something about Starbucks had touched a nerve deep in his soul. A year later, he joined the company. He wasn't the founder, but from the moment he walked in, he dreamed bigger than anyone else. Starbucks was still small, still local, but Howard saw what it could become. Not just a coffee brand, but a third place in people's lives. Not home, not work, but something in between. A place to feel human. He had no idea how hard the journey would be. But for the first time, Howard wasn't just chasing success. He was chasing vision. And he was just getting started. In 1983, Howard Schultz boarded a flight to Milan, Italy, on a business trip that would quietly change the course of his life and the future of coffee in America. He had never seen anything quite like it. In every street corner of Milan, tiny espresso bars buzzed with life. Businessmen in sharp suits stood at marble counters, sipping rich, bold coffee in tiny cups. Neighbors exchanged morning greetings with warm familiarity. The baristas knew every customer by name, sometimes even their drink of choice. There was rhythm, tradition, intimacy. It wasn't just about caffeine. It was about ritual. Howard watched and felt something stir deep inside him. Back in America, coffee was an afterthought, a quick stop at a gas station or a bland cup in the office break room. But here, in Italy, it was an experience. Coffee wasn't rushed. It was savored, shared, celebrated. Each visit to an espresso bar felt like walking into someone's home. He imagined that feeling brought back to America. Not just the drink, but the energy, the connection. A place where strangers could meet, artists could write, students could study, and friends could laugh over a cup of something comforting. He returned to Seattle burning with vision. Back at Starbucks, he shared his experience with the team. He proposed a bold new idea: transform Starbucks from just a coffee bean cellar into a cafe-style coffee house, just like the ones in Milan. A place where coffee was served by the cup, where people could sit, talk, and connect. But the founders didn't share his enthusiasm. To them, Starbucks was about quality beans, not cafes. They believed Howard was chasing a dream that didn't fit their brand. They told him no. But Howard couldn't let it go. He had seen the future. He had tasted it, smelled it, lived it. So he made a decision that broke his heart. He left Starbucks. He walked away from the company he loved, believing that the only way to bring his dream to life was to build it himself. He would create his own coffee house, from scratch. With little more than a vision and a fire in his chest, Howard began his next journey, one filled with doubt, struggle, and risk. He had no guarantee of success, no blueprint, just the memory of those Italian cafes and a belief that coffee could become something far more than a drink in a paper cup. It could become a culture, and Howard was determined to bring it home. Starting something from nothing is never easy. For Howard, it was terrifying. After leaving Starbucks, he poured everything into launching his own coffee company. He called it Il Giornale, inspired by an Italian newspaper and the rhythm of daily life he had admired in Milan. He envisioned cafes filled with conversation, connection, and culture, where espresso wasn't just a drink, but a daily ritual of joy. But dreams need funding, and Howard had none. He began knocking on doors, meeting with over 200 potential investors. Time and time again, they said no. They didn't understand the idea. They didn't believe Americans would pay for expensive coffee in tiny cups. Some even laughed. Others politely smiled, then closed the door. But Howard kept going. Each rejection made him sharper, stronger, more focused. Every no fueled his drive. He believed so deeply in this dream that he refused to let it go. Finally, after months of tireless pitching, a few people took a chance. They didn't just invest in coffee, they invested in Howard. With just enough capital, Howard opened the first Il Giornale Cafe in Seattle. It was modest. No flashy signs, no big budget. Just passion and purpose. The smell of roasted beans filled the air. The baristas wore sharp uniforms. Classical music played gently in the background. Each cup of coffee was served with care, not just speed. And customers came. Slowly at first, curious. Then regularly. Then religiously. People stayed. They talked. They brought friends. They came back the next day. And the next. Soon, Illinois Journal became more than a cafe. It became a community. A place where stories began, where friendships blossomed, where even a quiet moment with a warm cup felt like home. Howard had proven the idea could work. But something unexpected happened next. In 1987, the original Starbucks owners decided to sell the company. They offered it to Howard. It was a full circle moment. Now, the very company that once said no to his vision could become the foundation of everything he had dreamed of. But to buy Starbucks, Howard would need over $3.8 million. A daunting number. Still, he believed this was his moment. He rallied investors once again, and with determination and some help from those who believed, he raised the funds. Howard bought Starbucks, and with it, he now had the canvas to paint the future of coffee in America. Owning Starbucks wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. Howard knew the brand had potential far beyond what anyone had imagined. At the time, Starbucks only sold coffee beans and equipment. No espresso machines, no lattes, no cafes filled with people. It was still just a store, not yet a place. But Howard envisioned something bigger. He didn't just want to sell coffee. He wanted to sell an experience. The feeling of comfort. The sound of gentle music. The warmth of a hand-wrapped cup. He wanted each visit to Starbucks to feel like a ritual. Not rushed. Not transactional. But deeply human. To do this, he had to reimagine everything. He started by transforming stores into Italian-inspired cafes, complete with trained baristas, handcrafted drinks, and a welcoming ambience. Espresso machines hissed softly. The scent of roasted beans lingered in the air. Customers didn't just buy coffee. They paused, relaxed, connected. Some people called him foolish. Wall Street didn't understand the idea. Investors wanted speed and scalability. Howard wanted soul and authenticity. They pressured him to grow faster, cheaper. But he refused to cut corners. He believed in the long game. And it began to pay off. Word spread. Starbucks stores became places where people met before work, read books, studied for exams, or simply sat in silence. The Green Mermaid logo started appearing in more neighborhoods. Cities across America began to see Starbucks not just as a coffee shop, but as a cultural shift. It was a revolution. Behind the scenes, Howard worked tirelessly. He wasn't a CEO sitting back. He was involved in everything. Training staff, testing drinks, visiting stores, listening to customers. He believed the details mattered because people mattered. One store became 10, then 100, then 1,000. Yet through the rapid growth, Howard kept the core intact. Respect the bean. Respect the people. Respect the moment. Starbucks was no longer just a company. It was becoming a global movement, one cup at a time. And as the world watched, Howard Schultz stood quietly behind the counter, still believing in the simple power of a shared coffee. As Starbucks expanded across cities, states, and eventually continents, Howard Schultz began to ask a deeper question. What was all this growth for? It was never just about coffee. Howard had always believed in creating a company with a conscience, a business that could scale without losing its soul. But now, with stores multiplying by the day, the pressure to perform came faster and louder. More revenue, more speed, more locations. Yet Howard paused. He didn't want to build an empire that forgot its purpose. He remembered his father, a man who limped through life after a workplace injury, a man who had no benefits, no dignity, no second chances. Howard couldn't rewrite his father's story, but maybe he could honor it. And so, Howard made a choice that stunned the corporate world. He offered full health benefits, not just to full-time employees, but also to part-time workers, baristas, cashiers, students, young parents, people who, in other companies, would be considered replaceable. To Howard, they were the heartbeat of Starbucks. But he didn't stop there. He introduced stock options, allowing employees, whom he called partners, to own a piece of the company. For many, it was the first time anyone had ever believed in them, let alone invested in their future. These decisions weren't always profitable. Shareholders pushed back. Analysts doubted him, but Howard stood firm. "Profit alone is not success," he often said. "Success is shared." He took things further, offering college tuition support, building ethical supply chains with coffee farmers, and investing in communities through store openings in underserved neighborhoods. He believed that every decision should echo a larger responsibility. This wasn't just business. It was personal. Howard had seen what happens when companies treat people like numbers. He had lived in that silence. Now he was building something louder, something more human. And while competitors raced to undercut prices and automate service, Starbucks became something different. A place where people felt seen. A place that paid attention. A place that proved kindness could scale. Beyond the beans, beyond the profits, beyond the headlines, Howard was quietly redefining what it meant to lead. Not from the top, but from the heart. Success isn't a straight line, and Howard Schultz knew this better than most. After years of steady growth, record profits, and a loyal customer base, Starbucks had become more than a coffee shop. It was a global phenomenon. But then, cracks began to show. By the mid-2000s, the pace of expansion had become relentless. New stores were opening so rapidly that the original vision, warmth, connection, quality began to blur. Howard, who had stepped down as CEO in 2000, watched from the sidelines with unease. The company was still growing, but something felt off. He visited stores and saw baristas overwhelmed, customers rushed, and espresso machines that blocked human interaction. Starbucks was starting to feel like every other chain. The soul was fading. Then came 2008. The world plunged into a financial crisis. People were losing jobs. Economies were collapsing. And Starbucks, once thought untouchable, was suddenly vulnerable. Profits fell. Thousands of employees were laid off. Hundreds of stores were forced to close. For the first time, Starbucks wasn't a symbol of stability. It was in trouble. And so, Howard returned. Not as a savior, but as a founder reclaiming a dream. He walked back into the CEO role, not for glory, but for responsibility. Because when something you've built starts to fall apart, you don't watch from afar. You step into the storm. One of his first decisions? He shut down every Starbucks in the United States, all 7,100 stores, for a full afternoon. Not for renovations, but for training. To teach every barista how to pour a perfect espresso again. It was symbolic and necessary. Wall Street mocked the move. Critics called it naive. But Howard believed in rebuilding from the inside out. He trimmed the company's bloated operations, slowed expansion, focused on digital innovation and customer experience. But more than that, he reignited the emotional connection between Starbucks and the people it served. He visited farms in Rwanda. He listened to baristas in Detroit. He stood on stage and reminded thousands of partners why Starbucks existed in the first place. Not to sell coffee, but to create a moment of connection, one cup at a time. Through humility and courage, Howard guided Starbucks through the darkest chapter in its history. And slowly, the company began to heal. Revenues rose. Trust returned. And that familiar hum, the one you feel when you walk into a Starbucks and feel at home, came back. Because the storm, as fierce as it was, had not broken him. It had made him even clearer about the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. In the quiet calm after the storm, Howard Schultz stood before a new Starbucks, not just a place, but a symbol. It wasn't about the green apron, the lattes, or even the worldwide brand anymore. It was about the lives touched, the communities built, and the dream that had gone from a small Seattle store to a global presence that reached hearts, not just wallets. Howard wasn't just running a business. He was shaping a movement. Under his leadership, Starbucks had grown to over 30,000 stores across 6 continents. But he would be the first to say it was never just about growth. It was about impact. He introduced healthcare benefits for part-time employees, something nearly unheard of in corporate America. He offered stock options to baristas, calling them partners, not workers. And he created opportunities for education, helping thousands go to college through the Starbucks College Achievement Plan. It was radical, unconventional, and exactly what Howard wished his own father had experienced when he slipped and fell on the job decades ago, with no insurance, no support, and no dignity. Howard never forgot that pain. It fueled everything. And now he was using the very company he built to make sure no one else had to live that kind of story. He invested in veterans, refugees, and youth from underserved communities. He challenged other companies to act with conscience. He spoke on stages not just about coffee, but about purpose, responsibility, and moral leadership in business. But perhaps what mattered most was that he never stopped being that boy from the Brooklyn housing projects. He still believed in the power of dreams. He still believed one person could make a difference. And he still walked into Starbucks stores and asked baristas how they were doing and listened. Eventually, Howard stepped down from his role at Starbucks, not with sadness, but with peace. He had poured his life into something far more enduring than profits. He had brewed a legacy made of courage, of compassion, of coffee, yes, but mostly of connection. Because when you step back and look at the life of Howard Schultz, it becomes clear. He didn't just build a business. He built a better way to dream. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most powerful kind of success. And now, as you close your eyes, remember this. No matter where you come from, no matter how hard the journey, success is possible and dreams are real. Let Howard Schultz's story remind you, you are not limited by your beginnings, only by your belief. So rest now, dreamer. Tomorrow you rise. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope that by now your mind is calm, your heart is light, and you are already drifting into sleep, or perhaps already asleep. From here on, you'll hear only the soothing sound of rain, guiding you deeper into rest. Sweet dreams, dreamer. May tomorrow bring you peace, purpose, and inspiration.